So I mentioned in my July wrap up that I read a lot of Glen Cook. And by a lot of Glen Cook, I mean I read 5 Glen Cook novels in 1 week. And at the beginning of the month, I had read another one. So I want to talk about those as an update to my Glen Cook project because yes, like it says in the thumbnail, I'm still cooking. Glen Cook is just amazing. I mean, I can't believe it. I started with The Black Company years ago, my favorite fantasy series of all time. And then my project this year was to read every novel he's ever written. And man, it is going a lot better than I expected. He's got some stinkers, one of which I'm going to talk about here. He also surprised me in some really pleasant ways. Let's start with the biggest surprise. I had never read any of his science fiction. His science fantasy series, Dark Ward, does not count for 2 reasons. 1, it's not very good, and 2, it's science fantasy and not science fiction. His Starfishers trilogy, which is like hard sci-fi, is so good. I mean, we're going to break this down one book at a time and talk about them. And the first one, Shadowline, is a space opera, but it's not a space opera with like this single gallant hero or anything. Like it's this huge cast and it is a group of mercenaries, which your boy Glen Cook can write about mercenaries, as anyone who's read The Black Company can attest to. This is a family in the business of being a mercenary with like the patriarch, and then he's got his sons are part of this, and there's all these different characters in this book. And that's one of the flaws with the book because it's a short book and it's got a huge cast, which is a bit of a problem, especially at the beginning. Instead of a mid-book lull that you kind of expect from Glen Cook, it starts in the beginning, which is not a way to start a book, with it just kind of dragging on, but the payoff is great. The story ends up revolving around the Shadow Line, which is a line that was like manufactured on this planet that's like too close to a sun, and I think it's a tidally locked planet. And what ends up happening is everyone mines and lives in the Shadow Line. And at the end of the Shadow Line, something is discovered and it ends up just being this big deal. And we see like the culmination of this huge plan and all these different plots. And it's really good. It's like really good. It had no right to end as well as it did with such a slow beginning. And I think one of the best things about it is the character writing is so good. Every character in here is really amazing. It's some of Cook's best work, which is saying something because like The Black Company has just such a amazing cast of characters. His descriptive writing is like on another level. It's not boring and it's not overly descriptive or overly flowy, but you know, Glen Cook's ability to write these like very punchy sentences that just grab you out of nowhere and just blow you away, like that's all throughout this book. I couldn't believe it. And man, there's so many times that I was listening to the book and I would just stop and just focus because it was just captivating. His ability to craft a sentence is just on another level in this series. As I said before, it has a very strong ending and it ties up all the loose ends through the entire story. So even though this is the first book in a trilogy, it's not like a classic trilogy like you would expect. Everything's wrapped up at the end of this and I just loved it. I mean, like I said, the cast was too big and the mid-book slump appears in the first half, so that's never good. And like the one problem with it is mostly a personal complaint because I've already complained about this style of narrative structure, and that's the present and then a flashback and then a present and then a flashback. But it's done very well. And the best part about it is at the beginning of each chapter, he gives you the exact time and date that the flashback is happening. It reminded me a lot of like Use of Weapons from Ian M. Banks. And I don't mean that it's like that same style, but you have that same science fiction feel that you get in parts of Use of Weapons. And he has that same kind of narrative structure of flashing back and forward and that kind of thing. It's just real good. It was so good that I immediately jumped into the second book, which is Starfishers. And the thing about this trilogy is that each book is different. And this one is following a completely different character, but his minor character in this, like the sidekick type character or whatever, was a major character in the first book, which is the same kind of thing he did in the Dread Empire series. Like Dread Empire book 1, the minor characters in that end up being the main characters for the rest of the series. So you're just like, what? Oh, why did he do it this way? But it really works in this. And Starfishers is just something else. I mean, the premise is this guy is like a super spy. So this is like a spy thriller. And he has to infiltrate this ship of this culture that is the only group in the entire galaxy that can harvest the starfishers. And they don't harvest the creatures themselves. These are like beings that live in space that may or may not be sapient. Like you don't know at the beginning of the book, and it's kind of one of the plot points. and their poop is a fundamental material for creating faster than light communication and faster than light travel. Like hyperdrives is what they're referred to as. It's kind of like they're treated like whales or something, but imagine whale oil being the only thing that holds together like postmodern technology, and then there's only a single group of people that know where the whales are and are able to get anything from them. And so everyone wants that. All these different groups want that. Or there's all these like very intriguing like political things kind of right under the surface, which you don't expect from Glen Cook. And man, is so good. And so, yeah, that's the premise of that. They're trying to infiltrate this ship that's going out there to do the things they're going to do. And these guys are spies. And so there's a lot of spying and counter spying and like plots within plots. And it's got a lot of the really cool stuff from like 1980s science fiction. And this is from 1982. I mentioned it in another video, but Glen Cook got all three of these published in 1 year, which means he wrote all of them like back to back to back while working a full-time job, which I will never stop harping on. Like the man wrote 52 books while working full-time for General Motors. What's up with these full-time authors that write like 8 books over like 22 years or something? Anyways, it has a lot of the really cool stuff from 1980s science fiction tech. And the good part is like this doesn't get too deep into the weeds with any weird technology or anything, which is good because that can get boring. But it's action-packed. The characters are really good. I say it's action-packed, but there's not as many action scenes as you would expect for something that's a spy thriller. But you're just like glued to the pages the whole time. I love it. So, of course, finish that. I mean, like within 10 minutes of me finishing that, I started the final book, which is Star's End. So Star's End picks up right where Starfisher's left off. Same character, same sidekick, all that stuff. And what this one is about is all these different factions. So Starfishers follows one person. It's third person limited, just like the first book. But while the first book is this giant space opera cast, the second book is hyper focused on one character, and then it kind of opens up for Star's End, and Star's End kind of jumps around, and there's all these political maneuvers. And the thing is you have these 3 different groups that are trying to take control of Star's End. Star's End is a planet that is also a military base, but it's not a military base that was built by humans. The thing about Glen Cook's future history is it feels lived in. It feels lived in a way that like Malazan feels lived in. There's just layers and layers and layers of civilizations that have come and gone. And there's these mysteries, like there are these people that are basically humans, but not quite, like they're just slightly different. And the human race, like from Earth, doesn't know where their home planet is. Like that's another big secret that they hide because they know that the humans will wipe them out because this group had enslaved humanity for hundreds of years. So they don't want us to know where their planet is because they know we're going to wipe it out. And anyways, this ancient civilization that created this like planet / weapons factory military base thing is one of these mysteries that's trying to be solved. Like early on, it talks about how, yeah, you know, as soon as we got to the dark side of the moon and found that base there, and you're like, wait, what? Things got real. And it's like, hold up. We're talking about a base from a different civilization on the back of the moon. It reminds me of something like 2001 with like the obelisks and stuff. And you figure out, oh crap, like we're not alone, or we are alone now and we don't know what happened to the ones before it. It's the whole Fermi paradox thing, which I love in things like Rendezvous with Rama. There's just a lot going on in these books. I don't want to go too far into Star's End because it is the best book in the series. And it is fantastic. I mean, I was like 15% of the way through it and I'm choking up because I cared so much about some of the things that were happening to the characters. And then by the end, I'm just like bawling my eyes out. It was beautiful. The characters are amazing. And the thing is like you get to the end of it, and unlike the Dread Empire, when you get to the end of this one, you're like, oh, and you start putting together pieces that were being laid down in the first book. So this is all like very cohesive. Everything gets tied up. Like I thought all the loose ends were tied up at the end of book 1 for that story. And then you get to the end of this and you start kind of thinking back on it and you're like, oh wow, like this is a lot more than I remember. And the thing is like the books are super short. Like I keep looking over because my book's on the shelf. You can buy the Starfishers trilogy as a single like omnibus and it's like 900 pages, if that. So I mean, it's smaller than a modern epic fantasy novel and it's like about the same size as one of the bigger Expanse novels. So I highly recommend you just buy that and just read it. They work so good together that it almost makes more sense for them to be one book, which I know back then publishers were like, hey, we need 200-page books, man. Like, we got to print these cheap little books. We got these profit margins. And so you can come to us with one good 500-page book, or you can come to us with 3 mid 200-page books, and you'll make a little more money and we'll make a little more money. So I'm not saying these are mid. I'm just saying that was kind of what they did at the time. So it really makes sense for them to be put together as like a complete big book. Also, the audiobooks are very, very good. Now, I'm going to make a little interlude here before I talk about the best science fiction book Glen Cook has written so far, like that I've read. So I read Singin Blood. It's from NESFA Press, and it's like, okay, I seriously think that it was barely copy edited. I don't know if an editor actually told him to fix anything with like the narrative structure or the style of writing or anything. I will say, despite its weaknesses, Singin Blood is interesting because it doesn't read like anything else Glen Cook has written. And I'm 42 books into his bibliography now, so I can attest to the fact that nothing else reads like Singin Blood. I think he just wrote it just for shits and giggles or something. It reminds me of like a Dungeons and Dragons party. You got to hear about this scene. It's so funny. So the main character has like an imp, like basically like a demon or something that is like his sidekick. This imp of his is like a troll. It's so funny. One of his homies, who is like the stereotypical barbarian, is hitting on this woman out in the street, just, chilling, just, spending his day doing what he enjoys, which is like hitting on women. So the imp is like a shapeshifter. Normally he just looks like a normal dude, but his pupils like glow like ruby red. He turns into a little boy and he runs up to the barbarian and he's like, daddy, 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 like, when are you going to be home? Mommy's asking about you. And he did it just to ruin that guy's chances with that woman. And the woman gets all like mad and like storms off in a huff. And the barbarian's like, you're going to pay for this. And he kicks the imp, who still looks like a child, into traffic, like all these carts and stuff. And people are walking by and he literally just like punts a child into the street in front of all these people and like storms off. And it's like, did that just happen? And it's just so funny. I mean, imagine being like a bystander there and you're like, did he just kick a child? It's got some really fun stuff like that. And I really like the interpersonal relationships between the main character and his like squad. It really feels like something that you would do in a D&D adventure, but it gets repetitive. Like the same clues keep getting discovered and it's like, all right, man. And he keeps going about it the same way. And the main character is like definitely a Mary Sue, but like he was built to be a Mary Sue. Like his dad was literally like the Mary Sue. So this is like Mary Sue Jr., who's been trained and prepped for what's going to happen. Despite its flaws, I think diehard Glen Cook fans would enjoy it. And it's like super short. It's like 150 pages, if that. And they're like little baby pages. There's not a lot of words on each page. My copy is the first edition, first printing, signed for Joe. So I thought that was pretty cool. Let's get back to what really matters. Glen Cook's science fiction. This man probably should have been a science fiction writer. I love his fantasy work, but I think he's a better science fiction writer than he is a fantasy writer, which is really saying something considering The Black Company is my favorite fantasy series of all time. Passage at Arms is one of the greatest military science fiction novels I have ever read. And military science fiction is like my bread and butter. The Forever War, Forever Free, Ender's Game, Old Man's War, Starship Troopers. I love that stuff. And this is just as good as all of those. Glen Cook likes to talk about how he's not putting anything in the book for you to interpret. He talks about the people who spend way too much time picking through books as like the literati. And I think he's gaslighting us some of the time when he says that he's not doing it intentionally, because this book is one of the best anti-war war novels I've ever read. The message is loud and clear in this, and it is wonderfully written. Like I was talking about in the Starfishers trilogy, his ability to write characters and his ability to write these very evocative descriptions in science fiction is just amplified in this. So the premise of Passage at Arms is you have a disabled war veteran who has become a writer, which, man, a war veteran becoming a writer? Who'd have thought of that? It's literally Glen Cook. And this takes place before the Starfishers trilogy. Like this is a prequel, but it's a standalone prequel and it's like a very narrow focus. So you can read it before or after the Starfisher trilogy. It does not matter. They've talked about this war like maybe 3 times in the Starfishers trilogy. One of the major things in this is talked about in the final Starfishers book, but for like a chapter. So you're not really missing anything reading it before or reading it after. Like it's rewarding either way. this disabled war veteran is put back into the military as an officer. He's like a lieutenant, and he's going to be on a ship that is essentially a submarine in space. You have like super, super thin walls on this ship. The ship is nothing but like very cramped living quarters for like 45 dudes and weapons and enough food for them to maybe survive 3 months. And that's on like starvation rations. And what these things have is this like ability to go invisible. And it's not that they're going like invisible with like a cloak or anything. What they found out was ships under a certain mass using their hyperdrive technology, which is like the faster than light technology in the setting. Some weird things happen when you're under a certain size. And so under this like maximum mass, these ships, by tuning their engines a certain way, they do what's called climbing instead of diving like you would in a submarine. But a climb puts you into essentially a different dimension. But this dimension, there's nothing there. It's the void. And what happens is when you are climbing, the ship can't dissipate heat like it can in hyperdrive or in normal drive, like just going through space. So the ship gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And there's only so many ways you can kind of absorb the heat with like heat sinks and stuff. So you have a limited amount of time that you can climb. And the thing about these ships is you only have like a 40% survival rate. This is like the bombers in World War II. Like you probably aren't going to come home alive. The book is just magnificent. Like he's brought onto this ship in a way that no other civilian has been able to do with the goal of writing. This is like an analyst from the Black Company, except in his science fiction stories. So he's on this ship and he's meeting all these people and he's trying to fit in. And he's just talking about his experience on this ship as they go to war, like they're going on a mission. And it's terrifying. And you really start to love all these different characters that you meet on the ship. And it is just gut-wrenching and intense. Like, I don't know how Glen Cook managed to write like the claustrophobic intensity of a submarine, but a spaceship. Not only do you get that, you kind of get all these little pieces of this lived in world that he wrote in the Starfishers trilogy. There's just so many good things about it. Like I've said, the cast is super strong. The first person narration, which I think is one of Glen Cook's strengths, is just firing on all cylinders. Now, this book is perfect for me, but I can admit that the only weakness for probably other people is it's a little exposition heavy with some of like the sci-fi tech stuff. There's like this techno garbage, but it's not garbage. It's very pertinent to the things that are going on. And he does a really good job of writing it in a very interesting way, but I know some people's eyes just kind of gloss over when that stuff comes up. But you can fight through it or just skim those sections a little quick, and this is so good. This is probably the best thing he's written that I have read. Out of the 42 books, I think Passage at Arms could go up against any two Black Company novels. It has an ending that is one of the most beautiful endings I have ever read in a military fiction book. It is wonderful. I highly recommend it. Like if I had anyone out there that was like, I want to read something really good, but I'm not the biggest fantasy fan, and they're like, you know, generally a science fiction enjoyer or something, I would hand them Passage at Arms. I would buy them Passage at Arms. It is so good. I know I was like burying the lead in this video because I'm talking about this, you know, whatever, 18 minutes into the video or something, but man, it is so good. Still gushing about it, so let's move on to the final book that is almost as good. It was the first one I read this month. Angry Lead Skies, book 10 in the Garrett P.I. series. So this one is one of the best Garrett novels he's written. I didn't know if he would ever be able to come close to the first like 3 Garrett novels, because the first Garrett novel is perfect. And then the next few are just really, really good. And then the rest are like, yeah, these are good. Like they're better than good, but they're not great. And then you get Petty Pewter Gods, which is one of my favorites in the entire series. And then like and then man, book 10, Angry Lead Skies. I love it. It is everything I need in a Garrett P.I. novel, and then so much more. This is definitely the setting where Glen Cook is like, I'm going to do whatever I want, and you're just going to enjoy it or deal with it. It's so strange. There's some really weird stuff going on in this, and yet again, it's some of his best writing. I don't want to give away the big spoiler, but I'm gonna hint at it just a little. One of the things I really love is a fantasy setting or a science fiction setting where someone has to describe something that they don't understand. And this is first person limited. So we are looking at a fantasy society trying to deduce what this advanced technology is. And that's just like a minor part of the book, but it's written so well. It's just great. I mean, you get all of my favorite characters from the series. It's innovative, it's refreshing, and it's innovative, it's refreshing, and it's just ridiculous too. Like, it's all the greatness of Garrett. The thing I love about it is, like, yeah, this is a noir detective story, but there's just all this fantastic humor, and just sometimes shit just gets ridiculous, and I love it. I don't know if you can tell, but I might be a Glen Cook enjoyer. I thought that 30-something books into his bibliography, like, 3/4 of the way done, I didn't know that I was going to stumble upon some of his best writing. This month has been an absolute joy for me. Even Sung in Blood, which isn't the best, was still refreshing because it's unlike anything else he's ever written. I'm going to be seriously bummed out when I get done reading all of his works, because I know I'm probably only going to get a few more things from him ever, but I'm already looking forward to rereading the Starfishers trilogy because I get to put all these pieces together that I discovered later in the story. And the same thing goes for like Garrett. And yeah, I'm actually kind of bummed that there's only one more science fiction novel from Glen Cook from 1987, which is The Dragon Never Sleeps, which is also his favorite book that he's written, along with a few other authors. They love it too. So I'm just like, oh man, whew, if Starfishers was this good and Passage at Arms was even better, The Dragon Never Sleeps might just be my book of the year if it's good enough. Like, I know I'm hyping the crap out of it right now, but I'm really looking forward to it. It's gonna be the last Glen Cook book I read. Like, that is gonna be the capstone for this project. But yeah, this has been an amazing journey. Diving this deep into a writer's bibliography really, really lets you kind of understand it at another level. I really wish more people would do this. One of the reasons I'm going through this is some of these books are stinkers, but others are hidden gems. Like the Starfishers trilogy does not get the recognition it deserves. Passage at Arms should be on like the top 50 science fiction novels of all time. Like, holy crap. And there's like maybe 100 reviews for it or something, if that, on like Goodreads. I'd have to double check. But this project is going great. This has been incredibly rewarding. Let me know in the comments if any of you are interested in some of these lesser known Glen Cook novels. Let me know in the comments if any of you are interested in these lesser known Glen Cook novels. And just let me know what you think about this project so far. I think it's about time that I end this. So I want to thank you for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.